Hey everyone, today we're working on a project to do some drywall repairs, and I thought I'd show you the process that I go through to repair cracks in drywall. So we've got this is a window, and you can see up in the top right and then also down in the bottom left. And basically these are settling cracks. They've been here for quite some time. We're doing a complete repaint, actually going to be doing floors and a bunch of work in this house. So it's time to fix the drywall. So I thought I'd show you the process that I go through. First thing we did, because this is around a window, is of course pop off your window casing. And incidentally, the easiest way to do that is, actually here, I'll just demonstrate right here on the floor because I'm going to take this base off. Anyway, what I like to do to take off trim is I have this old putty knife that I've had for years. Any putty knife will work. If you've got a paint line, you need to make sure you take a knife and scribe that paint line before you take your trim off, because otherwise that paint, I meant to say caulk line. If your trim's been caulked, you need to take a knife and scribe that caulk line. Otherwise, when you pull your trim off, there's a good chance that it'll tear the paper of your drywall or pull the paint away and make a real mess. But what I do is I just take an old putty knife and I stick it down behind the trim, and I kind of use that to get it loosened up. Normally you would start on the end, of course, not right in the middle. But once you get it loosened up, then I'll take a bar, put that bar back. And the reason I do this is this way you can make sure that you don't damage the drywall back behind. Now when I pry up, I'm prying against this old putty knife, and I'm not prying against the drywall, and actually, which would damage the wall. So that's the way that I take the trim off. The other thing is that I've already done, which you can probably see. So two things. I've already located, and it just so happens that both of these cracks are right on studs. This is pretty easy to repair, but I just took screws, took basic drywall screws, number 6 1 1/4, and I secured it really well along that stud. Use a stud finder to make sure you know exactly where the stud is at. This Franklin stud finder is the best stud finder I've ever found. It'll just press the button and it will automatically, you'll walk right along the wall and it'll show you right where the studs are. So this is the best stud finder to have. I'll try to find it and put a link down below for you. So we got the drywall secured, so it's secured well to the wall. And what I did is I took some sandpaper, pretty coarse. I think this is like 60 or 80 grit, and I scuffed up an area, as you can see, about probably 18 inches. I'd go at least 18 inches wider than your crack. And that does a couple things. It kind of knocks down the texture on your wall, so you've got a smoother surface when you're applying your mud. But more importantly, it knocks down any shine from the paint, because you want to make sure that you get good adhesion from your drywall mud when you make this repair. Now, just to be on the safe side, what I'm actually going to do now is take some primer, and I'm going to go ahead and prime this area as well. The primer will stick to about anything, and that way when you come back with your drywall mud, the drywall mud will be sure to adhere to the primer. You don't have to worry about the shine of your wall potentially having that drywall mud release over time. So I'm going to go ahead and get some primer on the wall, and then I'll come back. Alright, so the primer is dry. We're ready to move on to actually taping and mudding the wall now. And incidentally, I should mention too that I'm sure I'll probably get some comments that will say that you don't need to primer the wall before doing a patch. And I've done lots of drywall patches before without priming the wall. But in my personal opinion, if it's a big patch like this and you want to guarantee 100% that you're going to have long-term success and not have any failure, I just think it's cheap insurance to do. So I'll just throw that out there for anybody who says it's not necessary. But anyway, couple things that we're going to need here for tools. So I've got several different drywall knives. We're going to start with a 4-inch and work our way up as we get wider on the patch here. We've got some basic tape. This is just paper tape. I know some people like to use the there's an adhesive backed kind of a mesh tape that you can use as well that will stick to the wall. I'm not a huge fan of that stuff. It's kind of thicker than the paper tape, and it's what I've used the most and have had good success with it, and I like that it's a little bit thinner, so I use that. Gotta have a drywall pan or a mud pan of some sort. if you're just starting out, I'd recommend just getting a basic mud pan like this. I've got another pan that they call a hawk, which is basically a flat piece of metal with a handle on the bottom. And I actually like to use that if I'm you know, walking around the house doing a lot of different areas, but it takes a little time to get used to using a hawk. So if you're starting out, I'd recommend a basic drywall pan, and then of course we need some mud, and I've just got a bucket of mud here. So what we're gonna do, I've just got this opened up, brand new bucket. I'm gonna take our tape and just get a piece of tape that's as long as the section you need. So we're gonna go down to, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna tape over the crack, and I'm gonna go beyond just a little bit, just a couple inches. So we're gonna go there to there. Just use your knife, the tape will tear off real easy. So there's our piece that we're gonna put on there. Now, our goal here is we're going to apply some drywall mud, and we're going to lay our tape on top of it. Then we're going to put another coating of mud on top of the tape, and then we're going to kind of feather it out each side. And it's kind of a fine line here when you do this. You want to have a good layer of drywall mud completely behind the tape. You want to kind of press that out so you don't have, you know, a large bulge here, but by the same token, you don't want to press so hard that you squeeze all the mud out from the back of the tape. Because if you do that, then the tape is not going to do its job. It's not going to stick. So I just have a couple small patches here, so I'm just going to put a little bit of mud in the pan. You don't need very much. And what I like to do is just run down the middle of my patch area, kind of smear it in there, and then take your knife, so there's my basic patch area. Take your tape, lay it in there, and then kind of hold it when you start to rub down it. Sometimes the tape will pull down the wall, so I kind of start in the middle, hold the top, and kind of pull down. Now this doesn't have to be perfect. This is, we're gonna end up doing at least 3 coats on here. And so we got plenty of opportunity to make this look good. So again, don't overthink this, kind of get it on the wall. And one thing that I'll say when you're doing any kind of drywall work, it's always easier to go back and add to it rather than put on so much mud to begin with that you have to sand it off. So it's better to go a little bit thin at first and then add layers. Don't put it on super thick, because you'll regret that, because sanding is a big mess and you want to try to avoid that. So pretty simple. There's our first coat. We're going to let this dry really well, and then when we're done with that, we're going to come back with a wider knife, and basically we're just going to start to build this up. And after a couple of coats, this tape will go away, and then we just want to taper it so that it makes a gradual, I don't know, call it kind of a gradual hump on the wall. But if you do it nice and gradually, your eye won't see that. When it's primed and painted, it'll completely disappear, and it'll be like the patch was never there. So I'll come back when this is dry, and we'll come back for a second coat. All right, so it's been a few hours. We gave the drywall mud a chance to dry. What I like to do is, when I come back, first of all, a quick tip. So you're gonna have, even though I try to clean off my knives really well when I'm done, it's pretty common you get little kind of dried bits of drywall mud. Gotta get the dog out of the picture, sorry. Take another knife, scrape your blades like this. Sorry, my dogs are helping here. And then also in your pan, you wanna make sure you scrape really well in your pan. What that does, and you can see right there, it gets little bits of dried drywall mud out of there. Those little bits of dried drywall mud, if you don't clean those out, when you're trying to actually put it on the wall, they'll come loose, they'll get into your wet drywall compound, and they'll just kind of make things a mess, make it more of a challenge. So give it a good scrape, get everything cleaned out before you get more mud in the pan. Okay, so we've got some more drywall compound. Now what I'm going to do, we started off with a 4-inch knife. I'm going to jump up now to an 8-inch knife. And just like scraping the pan, I just take the knife and just kind of gently rub over the area where you've done your taping job. And because a lot of times you'll have kind of some ridges that'll be left behind from where you spread the joint compound. And if you there's no need to sand, just use your knife, and there's really nothing, I can't even show you here because that ended up being nice and smooth, but that's the easiest way to knock off those ridges before you get started. So we're just going to get some mud on the knife. Make sure you get so that you've got some mud across the full width of the knife. And I'm going to run down right in the middle of that tape joint. We're just going to apply some mud there. And at this point, we're going to start to see that tape's going to go away. Now, each step here, basically, as I said before, we're just going to taper this out a little more. The further you tape it away from that tape joint, the more that joint will basically just vanish. And the technique here, what I like to do, so I apply it, I put some kind of moderate pressure right down the middle. And now is where you get a little bit of technique. So on either side of this, what I'm going to do, first I'm going to go on the left side, and I'm going to put pressure. I'm going to put pressure to the outside basically, and these knives are flexible, so when you put pressure to the outside edge, and I'm going to kind of hold the knife up on where the tape line is, and by doing that I'll be able to feather that off without squeezing too much of the mud off where the tape is. A little bit hard to explain, but basically I'm just going to put pressure there, and you can see it kind of took it off the left side where it's putting pressure. I'll come to the right side, and like that, and that's good enough for right now. And you can see probably on camera, you can still see the tape through there, but it's a lot less visible than what it was before. Once that dries, that tape, you're not really going to see it much, and it's to the point now. Our next step is I'll jump up to a 12-inch knife, and by that point, once I do the 12-inch, this repair will be basically complete. So I'll bring you back when this is dry. We'll hit it with the 12-inch and talk about next steps. All right, so that second coat is dry. It's time to move on to our third and final coat. So now we're going to jump up to a 12-inch knife. Just like before, you want to make sure that you get your pan clean of any dry compound. I don't think I was really clear before, but again, lots of dust in there. The problem you'll have, especially now in the final coat, if you have bits of dried compound in there, that'll get mixed in with your mud, and then what will happen is when you drag up on the wall, inevitably you'll get a small dry bit, and it'll pull through your fresh mud, and it'll leave a crease in there, and you'll continue to fight that until you get rid of all those little bits of compound. So that's why it's really important to get anything dry out of your pan. And as far as cleaning knives too, the easiest way to clean a knife is just take two knives together and just work them off one another, and that'll knock any dry bits off of there. Okay, so just like the first two times, we're just going to work on continuing to taper this out. I'm going to put most of my emphasis, we've got the tape is well covered, so most of my emphasis is going to be to kind of apply to each side of the tape and just try to have a nice, smooth, even feather off each side. And I should mention too, just like before, if you have any small, ridges or any little bits left from your last layer, just take a knife, just rub like that, rub across. If you have anything that's any deeper ridges, this will be a time to go ahead and take sandpaper or sanding sponge and knock off any of those ridges that might cause you problems. I'll show you here in just a minute what I like to use for sanding, but we've got a pretty smooth surface, so we're going to go ahead and start applying the joint compound. And I'm just going to put it on there kind of extra thick, and then start to smooth it out. And I'll take some of what I've wiped off, and I'm going to actually go out a little bit wider than my knife. Really trying to accentuate how much I'm tapering this out. The wider this is, the less your eye is going to notice any kind of hump where that tape, where the repair is. Right now I'm just kind of painting it on the wall, and I'll clean it all up here in a minute. All right, so I think that should be adequate. So now I'm going to start in the middle, and I'm going to kind of put firm, smooth pressure up. And actually, here's a perfect example. You can see what happens. There's a little something that was in my mud, a little dried spot, and it leaves a line like that. So it's no big deal. It's easy to fix, but that's exactly what I was talking about, trying to make sure that your tools and paint are as clean as possible. Go back over the top of it, knock it right off. Just like before, I'm kind of putting pressure on the outside of the knife. Now on this left side, I'll put pressure on the outside of the knife here. Very light pressure. I don't want to take off too much. And that right there should be a good final coat. So we'll let this set up, and then I'll come back and show you the little bit of sanding that we need to do to get this prepped for texture. All right, so the third coat of mud is dry, and it's time to go ahead and get this sanded and prepped for the texture process. So there's a couple different things that you can use for sanding drywall. Actually several different things. So you could just get regular sandpaper, typically 120 grit, somewhere in that range is what's generally recommended. Pretty common to use this is a drywall sanding tool, and it's got a mesh, like an abrasive mesh, very similar to sandpaper on there, and that takes mud off really quick. Actually, if you've got maybe kind of some ridges that you need to knock down, this is this is fairly aggressive, and we'll take those ridges down really quick. You need to be careful though that you don't take too much mud off with these. My preference, and what I've almost always used now, is just to use a sanding sponge. So these are the equivalent of 120 grit. My preference is actually these long ones. These are these small ones. I guess those are 4.5 inch sponges. So this must be a 9-inch sponge. I really like the long ones. As you can see, this thing is pretty much worn out. I've had it for a long time, but surprisingly, they last a long time. And if you think they're kind of worn out, sometimes you can kind of run some water over them and get them back to life too. But I like these because they're not super aggressive, and what you don't want to do. So I guess the key to sanding drywall, in my opinion, and I'm not a professional drywaller, but I've done enough of it that I've got some opinions on it. So what you don't want to do is really try to take off a lot of material. Our goal here basically is just to feather edges. So if you look closely, see if you can see this on camera, but you've got a little bit of a rough edge, and this is all really fairly smooth across here. By the way, I need to take this outlet plate cover off so I can get over there, but it's all fairly smooth. So we don't really want to try to take off a lot of material. If you do, then you're just kind of working backwards, and you may end up having to reapply more mud. And if you're not careful, you can actually sand too much, and you'll actually get down to your to your tape, and then you definitely have to start over. So the goal, what I always try to do, is I basically work out on the edges, and I'm just gonna work on feathering the edge so that the mud that I put on the wall sort of just tapers away and just disappears into the existing wall surface. And I like to kind of do that around the edges, get everything smooth on the edges, and then when I'm done, when I have everything tapered off real nice, then I'll come back and I'll just kind of do some real light sanding across the entire surface, and that just kind of evens off any little minor imperfections that you have, and you're done. And again, when I know the first time that I tried doing drywall, I was sanding, and just making a mess, but that's not the goal here. We just want to taper away any rough spots. So again, this thing's pretty well worn out, but I'm going to give it a shot so I can kind of give you an idea what it looks like here. Yep, and again, this, you know, even though this thing is well worn, it still gives me enough bite to be able to taper off this edge. So kind of do that. This is hidden by trim, so it doesn't matter too much, you know, around here. It'd be easier with this outlet cover off, but it's not really in my way, so that's fine. Okay, so I've got that outside perimeter just like that, with very minimal dust, minimal mess. It's pretty well tapered in. I can see a little bit over here. Don't go too far. Use your hand. Your hand will pick up, you know, any kind of imperfections that are on there. So I can feel on these outside edges. It's all pretty smooth now. I can definitely feel through the center that, you know, it's a little rougher, and there's a few imperfections there because I haven't hit it. So now that I've got the outside kind of like what I want, kind of some round motions will help to make sure you don't have any sanding marks. So now I'm just going to basically cut right across. There you go. That's nice and smooth, and it's ready for texture. So go around and do that process. Keep your shop vac handy. I've got my shop vac over here, so I'm going to go ahead and suck this dust up so we don't have drywall dust over the house. There's no finer dust, I swear, than drywall dust. It will make a mess more than pretty much anything else you do in construction. So keep your shop vac handy and kind of keep your mess cleaned up. So I'll come back to you in just a minute and I'll show you how I get this wall textured. Okay, so we're at the point in the process where we've got everything ready to apply the texture. Now, most of the time, I don't know, most of the houses around here that I run into have an orange peel texture. This is going to change if you're in an older home. I've seen, you know, lots and lots of different types of texture on the wall. Occasionally you may have like an executive finish, which is just a very smooth wall, and you don't have to do this, but around here anyway, the vast majority of homes are finished with an orange peel texture on the wall. So obviously this is all smooth now, so we need to match that. So you can get a can of wall texture from any of your home improvement stores. This is the Homax brand, which I see a lot around here real often, and seems to work well. The key, so basically the way this works is you can actually, there's an adjustment on the top here, so you can change this from a heavy texture down to a low texture or a medium, and you'll have to kind of play with this. The best thing you can do is take a piece of cardboard or something and you know, spray it to get a sample of what it looks like so you can match it to the wall. One thing that I like to do is I take hot water, so basically run hot water as hot as I can get it out of the faucet, and either fill the sink or fill a bucket and let this can sit in that hot water for about, you know, for 5 minutes or so, and just kind of warm it up. I think it helps, just makes it kind of go on smoother, and you want to make sure you shake it really well, which I've already done. So I'm just going to start kind of in the medium texture range. And when you do this, again, kind of practice on cardboard. But basically what we're going to do is we don't want to hammer it in one spot. We want to kind of feather it around. We need to make sure we get our smooth area. And then I'm just going to kind of gently blend out to the wall. If you remember earlier in the video, I had sanded down the old texture, so that's kind of knocked down. So I need to go pretty much the width of where I had put my primer previously, and so I'm going to start low, kind of an inconspicuous area, and then I'll just sort of kind of blend into it. So I'm going to go a little bit lighter, I think, a little finer. That's the way it's actually turned on here. Oh, and incidentally, as you can see, I've got paper protect your windows and the floor and whatever. You don't want to get texture all over. This stuff wipes up pretty easy, but just try to avoid a mess if you can. Now, let it kind of sit for a minute. As it dries, it seems like it kind of shrinks to the wall. And what I've got there, I think, is pretty good. Honestly, until you get a coat of primer over it, it's a little bit hard to tell if you've got a great match. But you know, it doesn't have to be perfect. You have to remember that you know, most people are not going to notice this. It's you know, you might, if it's not a 100% perfect match, you may notice it, but the chances are no one else that comes into your home is probably going to notice that you made a patch. So honestly, that right there is pretty good. If you've got a little spot that you think is a little light, just give it a little more. It's just as easy as that. All right, so we got texture on the wall. We're pretty much in the home stretch. Last step now is just to get a primer on the wall. I typically like to use a PVA primer, which is actually intended for sealing drywall. If you don't have that, you can use any kind of a good quality primer. You know, here's a Zinsser 123. Kills is real popular. Any of those should really work to get your drywall compound sealed well before you put a coat of paint on there. Okay, everyone, so we're back. I'm gonna wrap up this video here. I was able to get, so I got that primer on the wall. Also got a coat of paint on, and as you can see, I was able to get the window casing back on as well. And there is our final product. How well you can see that in the light, but you know, that's the patch area, obviously. That's the original wall, and you know, you can't see where that patch is. It turned out really well. And then up here, I think I had showed you that I also had to patch this corner up here, and same thing, turned out really well. And you know, I know it's there. If I look really hard, I can pick it out, but no one's ever gonna know there was a patch there. So it turned out great. All right, everyone, so thanks for watching the video. Hopefully I was thorough and did a good job of explaining all the steps in that repair process. If you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment below. I always make sure to read all the comments, and I'll do my best to respond if you have any questions. If that was helpful for you, do me a favor, hit the like button, subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. Really appreciate the support, and we'll see you in the next video.